I'm not sure what he's up to. Political ducks, private dick ducks, ducks that don't look like ducks at all, cigar chomping ducks from outer space, and of course drunken and horny ducks. There are just a crazy amount of cartoon ducks, many of which get up to no good, as I found out recently when a video I made about the Swedish Arne Anka really blew up, resulting in hundreds and hundreds of comments from cartoon duck enthusiasts. And by the way, I've got a really exciting follow-up to that Arne Anka video coming soon, so make sure you're subscribed. But in this video, I thought I would take a look at some of the interesting characters and stories my viewers told me about. Some of them involving Disney legal threats, and we'll take a look at some relevant non-duck characters as well. But probably the #1 duck that people wanted me to check out is Howard the Duck. Now, I gotta admit, I'm not really a fan of superhero comics, but this character sprung out of the Marvel universe. And as I understand it, he was a bit character in a project called Man-Thing, which was written by Steve Gerber. And Gerber thought it would be funny to add this duck character to that world, and I think he was right, because fans really loved it. And eventually Howard the Duck gets his own social satire series, commenting on modern life and corporate culture and the like. He doesn't really fit into the Marvel universe because he has no superpowers, and he's kind of able to look at this world from an outsider's perspective. And so in that sense, I think this kind of is up my alley. And the story becomes very interesting to me when Disney contacts Marvel and basically claims that Howard is an infringement on Donald Duck, seemingly the only duck that Disney feels has a right to exist. The Walt Disney Company gets Marvel to agree to change the Howard character according to suggestions by Disney artists, altering his looks in various ways, but primarily making him wear pants. It's kind of hilarious that Disney made another duck dress decently, but allows their own Donald Duck to just roam around freely without pants on. But Steve Gerber hated these enforced changes and wrote a whole issue about it, where a pants-wearing Howard gets put into a sort of washing machine called a Blandytron, which is supposed to remove his bad attitude. It doesn't end up working, as Howard remains who he was and returns to wearing no pants. However, and I'm skipping a lot of the story here, but eventually Marvel cuts ties with Gerber, and there's a legal battle between Gerber and Marvel over ownership of the character. It's around this time that Howard the Duck, the movie, comes out, which I do remember seeing like a million years ago, and I guess it was kind of a flop. But by this stage, Gerber is not involved at all, and so Howard conforms in that movie and wears pants, as he does also later in the Guardians of the Galaxy, which makes sense because by that time Disney has bought Marvel and is kind of running everything by their own rulebook. Over the years, there are attempts at reconciliation between Marvel and Gerber, and they hire him to write a couple of crossover things, which allows Gerber to construct a rather convoluted but interesting revenge. Look up these videos as they tell the story with a lot more detail and expertise. But basically Gerber writes a story starring Destroyer Duck and Savage Dragon, who end up rescuing Howard and his partner Beverly from the Marvel universe, leaving cheap clones in their place. The idea was that if Marvel wanted to use Howard the Duck in future stories, it would necessarily now mean that it wasn't the real Howard anymore, and instead just an irrelevant knockoff. So this is how Steve Gerber rescued his beloved character away from his corporate overlords, at least in theory. But then years later, Marvel actually once again invited Gerber to write another Howard the Duck series, where he was given more control again. And from what I've seen online, people say the 6 issues he wrote were great and provided a worthy ending for a popular duck character. Steve Gerber died in 2008. Several commenters mentioned the Air Pirates, which was a kind of a collective of cartoonists founded by Dan O'Neill, who published 2 issues of Air Pirates Funnies in 1971, which led to a famous legal fight with Disney that lasted for a decade. If you're not familiar, definitely check out this fantastic documentary video. But in short, these comics showed Disney characters having sex and doing drugs and generally engaging in activities that the Walt Disney Company was not thrilled about. O'Neill definitely seems like he wanted nothing more than to be sued, but the context of all of that is that he was this countercultural fighter who was protesting against the prevailing sort of happy-go-lucky American cultural cover-up narrative in the face of war and other atrocities. And Disney, I think, represented for him this big corporate machine that was complicit in this takeover of people's minds, replacing critical thinking with never-ending smiles and promises of ice cream. He wanted to show something more real. Now, Bobby London was part of this cartoonist group, and he came up with this Dirty Duck character, which, if I understand correctly, started as kind of an homage to Crazy Cat. The strip originated outside of the Air Pirates, but a long-form version of Dirty Duck appeared in the Air Pirates Funnies issue 1. I actually haven't found a whole lot about it, but there is this oversized compendium book that would be fun to get my hands on. It's apparently been delayed for years, but it's apparently out right about now. Now, a few people from Finland told me about the Finnish painter Kai Stenval. In amongst weirdly kitschy paintings of Pyton and Trump, Stenval paints a very Donald Duck-like figure in all sorts of situations and costumes. Sometimes he's a car guy or a boat guy. Other times he's a religious figure or a political figure or a character in a classical painting. And other times he's just kind of, I don't know, doing random stuff. I'm not quite sure what to make of his paintings. It feels like he's using the duck as a sort of generic stand-in for the everyman, a sort of blank slate avatar. Maybe even as a way for us to see ourselves, to insert ourselves in his pictures. They feel a little bit like something you might buy at a mall, but I don't know, there is a certain kind of deadpan vibe to them. I'm not sure what he's up to. And these are quite homoerotic. A couple of people told me about an Italian artist named Andrea Pazienza, which I'm probably mispronouncing, sorry. But his work looks interesting. He seems like he was a pretty hardcore guy. He died at age 32 from a heroin overdose. He made a comic with a title that translates into something like, "Why Goofy Looks Like a Junkie." And apparently the answer was more or less that Goofy is a junkie, which I think is a funny take on that character. And yeah, I know Goofy is not a duck, and neither is Mickey, but I thought it was worth mentioning this comic here because it is a riff on Disney characters, apparently employed to say something about Italian hippie culture. Unfortunately, I don't believe this is available in English, but this book, featuring his most enduring character, did get published here in the US. It has nothing to do with Disney, though. But this other thing does. A couple of commenters mentioned this really interesting legal case from Paraguay, a country perhaps not known for its rigorous trademark or copyright laws. Basically, there is a food packaging company there that sells spices and sugar and stuff to supermarkets, whose name is Mickey SRL, or I think it's pronounced Mickey SRL, and this is their logo. Now, you would think that this would be a huge problem for them, and indeed, Disney sued them, but they actually get away with using this logo because it turns out they registered the trademark before Disney did. More accurately, Disney had apparently trademarked Mickey Mouse only in the frontal view. They had failed to register a side view of Mickey's head. The Paraguayan company holds that side view trademark, and therefore, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court of Paraguay, and they ruled against Disney because Mickey SRL does have the legal rights to use this symbol, this side view of Mickey, as long as they stick to the food business and don't try to make their own Mickey movies or anything. It's a really fascinating case, and it's a little bit more complicated and has more nuance to it than what I just attempted to explain. So I recommend you check out this New York Times article right here for a little bit more context. But let's get back to ducks. On the recommendation of my viewers, I started watching a show called Duckman, which is an adult animated sitcom created by Everett Peck, based on a 1990 one-shot comic book. The animated show aired from 1994 to 1997 on the USA Network, and I found this 8-hour-long YouTube video of the first 2 seasons. To quote Wikipedia, Duckman is a private detective who lives with his family. But also, to quote one of my commenters, Duckman is excellent. He eventually abandoned his career as a private detective to play George Costanza in Seinfeld, wearing a Jason Alexander-shaped suit. In other words, this duck is voiced by Jason Alexander. Now, I don't think Disney had a problem with this show, as Duckman doesn't look much like Donald, but it is cool how adult it is, and I actually really like the style of this show. It has a cool hand-drawn indie feel, and the first season even features some music by Frank Zappa, and Dweezil Zappa appears in the voice cast credits. So yeah, definitely a worthy cartoon duck project. Now for this final one, I don't really have a story about this, but I feel I need to show you Norway's own Dølle, created by the comics artist Tommy Sydsäter. This was an insane Donald Duck parody that was published in a magazine called Pyton, or Python in English, back in the 90s. Pyton was sort of Norway's answer to Mad Magazine, although in my opinion it was not a particularly sophisticated answer. Dølle and mostly everything else published in Pyton was not exactly highbrow humor. It was mostly farting and puking and other shenanigans. But it was an important magazine because it was a home for and a start for many notable Norwegian comics artists. It later spawned editions in Sweden and Denmark and I think Finland as well. And there were definitely some very funny and outrageous comics in this thing. As you can see, Dølle doesn't look like a duck at all, but he very obviously shops for clothes at the same place Donald finds his sailor shirts. And also like Donald, he's not too bothered about pants. Anyway, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks again to the crazy number of people who watched and commented on my Arne Anka video. Like I mentioned up top, I have a really exciting follow-up to that brewing, so stay tuned and I'll see you soon.